Hey friends, so today we're making empanada dough, or also known as empanadillas. This dough is really super easy and it's flaky, and this is also kind of interchangeable with my pie crust as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into these ingredients. All right, you'll need about 2 to 2 1/4 cup of flour. To our flour, we're going to add a half a teaspoon of salt. You can add maybe a little bit more, but I would start out with half a teaspoon. And I've just got this in my stand mixer. It makes it a lot easier, but you can do this by hand and just use a bowl. And then I take 1 stick of frozen butter and a cheese grater and grate it into my flour. This is so much easier to do than using a pastry cutter to me, or using a fork, or even your hands to cut it in. All I got to do is grate it in. It comes out in perfect little even bits, and it's no fuss. Now, if you don't have time to freeze it, because there's been times where I didn't have time to freeze it, I just take cold butter, chop it up into cubes, and I prefer the mashing it with my hands, but a pastry cutter works as well. And if you don't have that, just use a fork and mix it up. And you can see how it just evenly distributes, and you just want to get the flour on that butter just to coat it. And I use this grating method for my pie crust as well. Makes it super flaky because it just evenly distributes throughout all of the flour. You don't have to worry about continuously mashing it, because it's going to. So once you get it mixed up, you're going to set that aside and take 1 egg, and you're going to mix that up and add about a teaspoon of vinegar, and you give that a good mix. And we're going to pour that right into our flour mixture. And that vinegar is going to give it just a little bit of flavor, that tang. You're not going to be able to taste it at all, but it's just going to add that little something extra. And when you make pie crust, these are all the same ingredients. Now, with the exception of the vinegar is not in there. You can add egg. It just adds moisture. What an egg does, it adds moisture to this and actually holds it together. I believe that, well, I know that the French, a lot of their pie crust actually do have eggs, and I believe Italian as well. Let me know in the comments. But traditionally, it does not require egg for a pie crust. But this empanada dough, the egg in there is perfect. It helps it bind together. But now we're going to add 1/3 cup of ice cold water. A lot of times I don't use just ice cold water. I will use a actual bottle of water that's been in my refrigerator, because that's cold enough. But you do want cold water because you don't want to melt the fat that's in there. So with pie crust, you can actually even use lard, as long as it doesn't have a strong bacon or pig fat flavor. Usually Crisco or butter is the best for any pies. But so I am just putting this into my stand mixer and just on my dough attachment, just mixing it on, starting with a slow speed, then a medium speed. You can mix this with your spoon or your hand. We're not looking for this to form a dough. It's just to kind of mix that water through, just so that way we don't have any big flour portions. And I only did this for about a minute or two, and then this is what it's going to look like. You're going to notice that it's kind of crumbly, and it might have some flour bits, but that's okay. What you really just are looking for is, see how I'm just pinching it with my hands and it's coming together? This is what you want. Trust this process. Do not add any more water. This is perfect. What's going to happen is the rest of the water, when we put this in the fridge, is going to eventually, it's kind of just going to expand and spread throughout the rest of this. But you are just going to take your hands and kind of do exactly what I'm doing here. You're just kind of pushing and scrunching it together. I'm adding all these little bits in there, and eventually it's going to come together and look something like this. All right. And then now I'm just kind of almost cleaning up my workstation here. Just making sure I get all these little bits and pieces. And you can see how it squishes. It kind of stays. It's starting to look more like a pie crust and empanada dough. This is exactly what you want. And now I'm just going to kind of form a circle, slap it around a few times. One time I seen Julia Childs and she had a piece of dough, and I don't remember exactly if she was making bread or something, but she slapped it on the counter and was like, "You must slap it around just a little bit. Just give it a spank." Oh my goodness, I laughed way too hard at that. Okay, now that we've done our Julia Childs slap method, your dough should just be a nice, supple, sexy dough. Like it should spring back on you. And you're going to place this either in plastic wrap or in a baggie for about 30 minutes minimum in the refrigerator. And if we haven't met, my name is Jennifer Scott. On this channel, we do all things recipes, gardening, tips, and more. So be sure you subscribe. That way you won't miss any videos. So now we're going to remove this from the fridge. And when you take it out of the refrigerator, it's going to look like this. It's going to be hard, and it's going to have these little white butter bits in there, and that is going to make it so flaky. To make this easier to work with, I like to just take a bench scraper and cut this in half. You just use a knife if you don't have a bench scraper. But it's just easier to work with, because if not, you're going to have like this big dough, and my counters aren't that big. So you want to flour your work surface. Even when you're working with pie crust, flour. Flour is your friend, because this is very, very sticky dough. This empanada dough is sticky. Right, after you have floured your work surface, what I like to do is take parchment paper, cut it up into like little squares, rectangle looking things. Anyways, however you cut them up, and I use a plastic baggie and will place the disc sometimes in my freezer. That way when I'm ready to make empanadas, I don't have to worry about making the dough. I can just pull these straight out. All right, and I'm going to show you a little trick I do in order to roll out the dough, and that's doing this little press and rock motion, because the dough is a little hard from being in the refrigerator. It's easy if you do this like roll and press method. It kind of works the dough out, and I'm going to show you from this angle so you can see it a little bit better. It's just, you can see how it's flattening it out easier than just trying to push your arm into it. And then you're just going to flip it over and work the other side just the same way, that little rocking, it's like a little press and rock motion. That's what we're going to call it, the press and rock. Okay, now we're going to roll this out, and you want to get it about 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm going to be honest, nobody is standing in the kitchen. I don't have time, at least, to be standing in the kitchen sometimes with a ruler. Every now and then my perfectionist kicks in, and that's what I want, but I don't have time for it. So this is about how thin you want it. You want it thin enough to where you can almost see through it, but then you want it thick enough so that way when you place something in it, the filling, it doesn't pop out. So now we're going to cut the disc. And what I do is I just take a bowl, place it on top, put it on the edge, press down, and then I take a knife and just score around. Okay, and this bowl is about 6 inches across or circumference. So it depends on how big you want your disc. I like them this size. They're a pretty good size. If you want them bigger, then you need to get a bigger one. But this is just simple and easy. Place this on a parchment paper. Place the parchment paper over. Place another one over it. And there you go. And then I stack these up. And I actually like doing the parchment paper, because that's how they would come if you bought them in the freezer section at your grocery store. That's how they would come. They would be stacked up for you. And I just like to stack them this way. That way, if I put them and I do freeze them, I can pull them out easy, and I can pull them apart, and they're not sticking to each other. And when you're ready to actually make your empanadas, you will take the disc, place it down on your workstation, and just kind of roll it out. You'll place your filling in, close it up, and you'll just press it with a fork and crimp it kind of on the edges so that way it seals. And then you will place this in either oil, air fry it, or bake it, whichever one you prefer. Frying is the more traditional method, but I prefer to air fry it because it's a little bit more healthy. But I will put in the description box the full recipe for the empanada dough, as well as I'll put the link for my video on how to make the empanadas themselves and how I fry them up and all my tips and tricks. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button for me, as well as let me know if you make this for your family.